Sometimes the things we think will save us end up teaching us how to truly live. Simon Foster learned this when he bought a broken-down Porsche 911 with his last savings. At 47, raising his daughter Kyla alone, he thought restoring an old car might give them something to share. When he opened the trunk, he found a leather case filled with letters, photographs, and journals. Inside were stories of love, adventure, and heartbreak from the previous owner. The car wasn't just metal and engine. It carried the dreams of someone who'd lived fully and fearlessly. What Simon discovered would change both him and Kyla in ways neither could imagine. But would he be ready for the secrets these pages held? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house on Maple Street had seen better days. Paint peeled from the window frames in long, tired strips, and the front steps sagged slightly to the left where the foundation had settled unevenly over the years. But it was home, the only one Simon Foster could afford on a factory supervisor's salary, and he'd made it work for the 3 years since his wife had left. Simon stood in the driveway that Saturday morning, staring at the Porsche 911 he'd just had towed from Bernie's salvage yard. The car sat there like a faded dream, its guards red paint weathered to something closer to dusty rose. The chrome had oxidized, the leather interior was cracked and sun-beaten. But beneath all that neglect, Simon could see the bones of something beautiful. At 47, he'd learned to see potential in broken things. It had to. The screen door creaked open, and his daughter Kyla stepped onto the porch. 16 years old, dark hair pulled back in a careless ponytail, wearing the same oversized sweatshirt she'd worn for 3 days straight. She looked at the car, then at him, her expression carefully neutral. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it." Simon tried to sound enthusiastic. 985 Carrera. Original engine. We can restore it together. I thought it might be a project, Kyla finished. She'd heard this pitch before, when he'd bought the lumber for the treehouse they never built, when he'd suggested they learn guitar together. The instruments still sat in their cases in the hall closet, but Simon had saved for 2 years for this car. 27 months of putting aside $40 here, $60 there, skipping lunches and wearing his work boots until the soles wore through. $3,200 in cash, handed to Bernie Kowalski in the salvage yard office. And now this piece of automotive history sat in his driveway. He walked around the car, running his hand along the oxidized chrome. The body was surprisingly solid. No rust through, just surface corrosion and neglect. The tires were flat. The windshield had a crack, spreading like a frozen lightning bolt across the passenger side. But the car had good bones. "Come look at the engine," Simon said. Kyla descended the steps slowly, the way teenagers do when they're doing you a favor. She stood beside him as he popped the hood. The flat-six engine sat there, dusty and oil-stained but intact. Simon had learned enough about these cars to know what he was looking at. The original motor. All the important pieces still there. "It's an engine," Kyla said. "It's a masterpiece of German engineering," Simon countered, trying to inject some wonder into his voice. "These things were built to last forever. We just need to clean it up, replace some gaskets, get it running again." Kyla looked at him with those eyes, her mother's eyes, that saw through everything. "Dad, do you even know how to fix a Porsche?" "I'll learn. We'll learn together." He closed the hood gently. "I thought maybe we could work on it on weekends. You know, spend some time bonding." There was no meanness in her voice, just a tired acceptance of her father's attempts to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Simon had been trying for 3 years, ever since Janet had left, ever since the divorce papers arrived with her new address in California, ever since Kyla had retreated into that shell of quiet teenage distance. He'd tried cooking her favorite meals, watching the shows she liked, asking about school. Everything felt forced, artificial, like he was following a script for a role he didn't know how to play. The Porsche had been his last idea, something concrete they could work on together, something with a clear goal and visible progress. "Let's at least look inside," Simon said. The doors were unlocked. The interior smelled of old leather, dust, and time. Simon slid into the driver's seat, and despite everything he felt something, a little thrill of possibility. The steering wheel was worn smooth, where hands had gripped it for years. The gear shift was notchy but present. The seats, though cracked, still held their shape. Kyla opened the passenger door and sat down without being asked. That was something. It's actually kind of cool, she admitted. In an old broken-down way, Simon smiled. It won't be broken down for long. We'll get it running, then we can take it out. Should we check the trunk? Kyla interrupted. See what's in there? Simon hadn't thought about it. The trunk was in the front on these cars, typical Porsche engineering. He pulled the release lever, and they both climbed out. Walking to the front of the car, the trunk lid lifted with a metallic groan. Inside, instead of the floor mats and old tools Simon expected, there was a weathered brown leather case. It looked old, the kind of leather that had been quality once, that had aged into something rich and textured. Brass clasps held it closed, tarnished but still functional. Simon lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than he expected, substantial. He set it on the hood of the car. What is it? Kyla asked, and for the first time in months Simon heard genuine curiosity in her voice. I don't know. He opened the clasps. They resisted, then gave way with satisfying clicks. Inside, the case was full, packed with papers, photographs, and several leather-bound journals. The smell of old paper and ink rose up, musty and somehow intimate. Simon picked up the item on top, a photograph, its colors slightly faded but still vivid. A woman stood beside this very car, but the car was new then, gleaming red, perfect. The woman was young, maybe 25, with dark hair whipping in the wind. She was laughing, one hand on the hood, her whole body expressing a kind of joy and defiance that made Simon's chest tighten. Who is she? Kyla whispered. Simon turned the photograph over, written on the back in elegant flowing handwriting. First day with my chariot of freedom, June 1985. The world is waiting. V. He set the photograph down and picked up one of the journals. The leather was soft, well-worn. He opened to the first page. The same handwriting filled the page. Strong and clear, June 15th, 1985. Today I bought a Porsche 911. Grandmother would be proud. No, she'd be ecstatic. She left me money with one instruction. Live boldly, Vivian. Don't make my mistakes. So here I am, 24 years old, standing in a car dealership, signing papers for a car I can barely afford and don't know how to drive properly. But it's mine, my chariot, my freedom. Tomorrow I point it west and see where it takes me. Kyla was reading over his shoulder. She was going on a road trip. Simon flipped through the pages. Tight handwriting filled everyone, occasionally broken up by sketches, small drawings of landscapes, faces, buildings. He picked up another journal, then another. There were 5 of them, along with dozens of loose papers, letters, more photographs. This is her whole life, Simon said quietly. In this car. They stood there in the driveway as the morning sun climbed higher, 2 people who'd been struggling to connect, suddenly unified by curiosity. Simon looked at his daughter and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, genuine interest, real engagement. Should we read them? Kyla asked. Simon looked at the photograph again. The woman, Vivian, smiled at him across 30 years, frozen in a moment of pure joy. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her, she'd left her story here in this car. And somehow, impossibly, that story had found its way to him. Yes, Simon said. Let's find out who she was. They carried the leather case inside, setting it on the kitchen table. The journals, the photographs, the letters, they spread them out carefully, reverently. Simon felt like an archaeologist, uncovering something precious and fragile. That afternoon, they barely moved from the table. They ordered pizza and left it half-eaten in the box. They read passages aloud to each other, passed photographs back and forth, pieced together the beginning of a story. Vivian Hart, 24 years old in 1985. An artist, a dreamer, a woman who'd inherited money from a grandmother who'd lived a conventional life and wanted something different for her granddaughter. The Porsche was her escape vehicle, her declaration of independence from a conservative family that expected her to marry. Settle down. Teach art at a local school instead. She'd bought a sports car and pointed it toward the horizon. Listen to this, Kyla said, reading from the second journal. July 1985, somewhere in Wyoming. I'm terrified. What if I'm not brave enough? What if I'm just a spoiled girl playing at adventure? But then I remember what grandmother said. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to act despite it. So I keep driving. Simon felt those words settle into his chest. When was the last time he'd been brave? When was the last time he'd chosen anything except the safe path, the responsible option? He'd wanted to be an architect once, had finished 3 years of college before money ran out, before he'd met Janet, before practical concerns had taken over. The factory job was supposed to be temporary, just until he could save enough to go back to school. That was 23 years ago. Dad, Kyla's voice pulled him back. Look at this. She held out another photograph. Vivian again, but this time standing in front of the Grand Canyon, arms spread wide, the vast emptiness behind her looking like freedom itself. She really did it, Kyla said softly. She just went. They read until the light outside faded to dusk, until Simon had to turn on the kitchen lights to see the pages clearly. They discovered that Vivian had driven to all 48 continental states in 2 years. She'd painted in every one, sold some pieces, gave others away. She'd met jazz musicians in New Orleans, cowboys in Montana, fishermen in Maine. She'd slept in the car, in cheap motels, on beaches. She'd lived. And somewhere in these journals, in these photographs, was the story of what had happened to her. Because the car had ended up in Bernie's salvage yard, and Vivian was nowhere to be found, that evening changed everything. Simon and Kyla sat at the kitchen table with Vivian's life spread before them, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence between them felt comfortable instead of strained. Kyla picked up the first journal again, opening to a page marked with a dried flower pressed between the leaves. Listen to this one, Dad. It's from when she first started the trip, she read aloud. And Vivian's voice filled the kitchen, confident, vulnerable, achingly human. June 20th, 1985, Nashville, Tennessee. I've been on the road for 5 days, and I'm already questioning everything. Last night I sat in a diner at 2 in the morning, drinking terrible coffee and watching the people around me. A trucker told me about his daughter who wants to be a doctor. A waitress showed me pictures of her grandchildren. Everyone has a story, and suddenly my own seems so small and self-indulgent. What am I doing? Running away from responsibility? Chasing some fantasy of freedom? But then I remember grandmother's face when she gave me that check. She said, I lived the life everyone expected. I was a good wife, a good mother, a good woman, and I was miserable. Don't be good, Vivian. Be real. So here I am trying to be real. Trying to figure out what that even means. Simon felt something crack open inside his chest. How long had he been good instead of real? How many years had he spent doing what was expected, what was responsible, what was safe? She gets it, Kyla said quietly. She understands. Understands what? Kyla looked at him, and her eyes were wet. That it's scary to be yourself. That everyone expects you to be a certain way, and it's easier to just go along with it. Simon reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. She didn't pull away. They kept reading. The journals revealed a woman who was brave and terrified in equal measure. Vivian wrote about painting in Taos, New Mexico, where the light was so perfect it made her cry. She wrote about getting lost in the back roads of Alabama and being helped by a family who fed her dinner and wouldn't let her pay. She wrote about standing on the shore of Lake Superior and feeling so small beneath the stars that she understood, finally, what humility meant. And she wrote about doubt. Pages and pages of doubt. August 1985, I called my mother today. She cried. She said I'm breaking Father's heart, that I'm throwing my life away, that I'll regret this foolishness. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just a spoiled child playing at being an artist. But I can't go back, not yet. Not until I know who I am outside of their expectations. Simon understood that too. He'd spent his whole marriage trying to be the husband Janet needed, the provider, the stable one. He'd given up architecture school. He'd taken the factory job and stayed there year after year. He'd been good, and she'd left anyway. "There's something else here," Kyla said, pulling out a folded piece of paper from between the journal pages. It was yellowed with age, the creases worn soft from being opened and refolded many times. Simon unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, written in the same elegant handwriting, but this one was addressed to someone. "Dearest Sophie," he read aloud. "I'm writing this because I need to say these words, even if you never read them. I need to tell you that every choice I made was about loving you in the only way I knew how." He stopped. The letter went on for 2 pages, but something felt wrong about reading it. This was private, meant for someone specific. "Someone named Sophie. Who's Sophie?" Kyla asked. Simon looked through the other documents, searching for context. He found it at the bottom of the case, a folded newspaper clipping, the paper brittle and brown with age. It was an obituary. Vivian Hart, 33, died peacefully on April 18, 1994, in Portland, Oregon, after a long illness. She is survived by her sister Margaret Hart Reynolds of Boston. Vivian was a gifted artist whose work captured the spirit of the American landscape. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the American Autoimmune Foundation. The words hit Simon like a physical blow. 33 years old. Vivian had been 33 when she died. He did the math quickly. She would have been only 24 when she bought the Porsche, and 9 years later she was gone. "She died young," Kyla whispered. "That's so sad." Simon reread the obituary, looking for clues. "Long illness. Autoimmune Foundation." She'd been sick then. Maybe that explained why the car had ended up in a salvage yard. Why all her possessions were still in the trunk, but it didn't explain Sophie, or the letter that was clearly meant for her. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of Vivian's mortality pressing down on them. Here was a woman who'd lived so fully, who'd driven across the country chasing beauty and meaning, who'd documented every moment with such care and attention. "And she died at 33. Keep reading the journals," Simon said finally. "There has to be more. We need to understand what happened." They worked through the evening, reading chronologically, watching Vivian's journey unfold. The journals from 1985 and 1986 were full of wonder and discovery. She painted constantly, sold work to small galleries, made friends in every town. She wrote about lovers, brief encounters that burned bright and ended amicably. She wrote about learning to be alone without being lonely. But then, in the journals from 1987, the tone shifted. The entries became shorter, more introspective. She wrote about fatigue, about joints that ached, about feeling older than her 26 years. March 1987. "Something's wrong. I've been tired for months, but this is different. My hands hurt when I paint. I'm scared, but I don't want to stop. If I stop moving, I'll have to face whatever this is." Kyla looked up from the journal she was reading. She knew. She knew something was wrong, but she kept going. "She was running," Simon said. "Running from doctors, from diagnosis, from having to stop." They found the confirmation in a journal from October 1987. Vivian had finally gone to a doctor in Portland. The diagnosis was there in careful, clinical language that she'd copied into her journal. Systemic lupus erythematosus, complicated by other factors. The doctors had recommended rest, medication, regular monitoring. Vivian had written beneath it, "They want me to stop. To settle down, take it easy, live carefully. But I'm 26 years old and my body is betraying me. If I only have limited time, I won't spend it in waiting rooms and fear. I'll spend it on the road." She chose to keep living, Kyla said, and there was awe in her voice. Even knowing she was sick, she chose to really live. Simon felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. Here was courage, not the absence of fear, but the choice to live fully despite knowing the cost. They read until midnight, until their eyes burned and their voices were hoarse from reading aloud. The journals tracked Vivian's journey through illness, through good days and bad days, through times when she could barely lift a paintbrush and times when she created her best work. And underneath it all, woven through the pages, were references to Sophie, wondering about her, missing her. Hoping she was happy. We need to find out who Sophie is, Kyla said finally, rubbing her eyes. Vivian wanted her to have this. That letter, it's meant for her. Simon looked at the leather case, at all these precious documents that told the story of a woman who'd lived boldly and died young. Somewhere out there was someone named Sophie who needed to know about Vivian, who needed to read that letter. You're right, he said. But first we finish reading. We need to know the whole story before we can decide what to do with it. Kyla nodded, stifling a yawn. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. They carefully organized everything back into the case, treating each item with the reverence it deserved. As Kyla headed upstairs to bed, she paused at the doorway. Dad, thanks for getting the car. Reading about Vivian, it's the most interesting thing I've done in forever. Simon smiled. Me too. After Kyla went to bed, Simon sat alone at the kitchen table, the photograph of young Vivian in his hands. She smiled at him across the decades, full of life and possibility, not knowing what was coming but choosing courage anyway. He thought about his own life, the dreams deferred, the risks not taken, the safe choices that had somehow led to being alone at 47, with a daughter he barely knew how to talk to. He'd been living carefully, cautiously, trying to avoid pain and failure. Vivian had known pain was coming and had chosen to live anyway. Simon set the photograph down gently and made a decision. He would restore the Porsche. He would read every word Vivian had written, and he would find Sophie, whoever she was, and make sure she knew about this extraordinary woman. It was the least he could do for someone who just taught him what courage really meant. 2 weeks passed, and the ritual became the center of their lives. Every evening after dinner, Simon and Kyla returned to the kitchen table with Vivian's journals. The leather case had become a presence in their home, a portal to another life that somehow made their own feel more real. Simon's days at the factory felt different now. He still showed up at 6 in the morning, still supervised the production line, still filled out the same reports he'd been filling out for 20 years. But something had shifted in his perspective. When his mind wandered during the monotonous hours, he didn't think about bills or responsibilities. He thought about Vivian's words, about what it meant to live boldly. Kyla was changing too. She'd started carrying a sketchbook, the kind with thick paper that Simon had found at the art supply store downtown. She drew during lunch at school, on the bus, late at night, when she should have been sleeping. Rough sketches at first, the Porsche, the house, her own hands, but getting better with each attempt. Look at this, Kyla said one evening, spreading a large hand-drawn map across the table. They'd found it folded in the back of the second journal, and it had taken them an hour to unfold it carefully. The creases worn soft from years of use. It was a map of the United States, but transformed by Vivian's hand. Routes were marked in colored pencil, red, blue, green, crisscrossing the country like veins. Small sketches dotted the landscape, a mountain here, a city skyline there, a lighthouse, a desert sunset. And everywhere, in that elegant handwriting, were notes. Sunrise in Taos, painted until my hands cramped, Simon read aloud. His finger tracing a route through New Mexico. Met a jazz musician in New Orleans who taught me about improvisation in life. Kyla read from Louisiana. Stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon and understood how small I am. Drove through a Kansas thunderstorm and felt more alive than ever. The map was a record of experience, a geography of meaning. Simon studied the routes, trying to understand Vivian's logic. She hadn't traveled efficiently or practically. She'd meandered, backtracked, taken detours. The journey itself had been the point. She went everywhere, Kyla said, her voice full of wonder. Every single state. Simon found a note in the margin of the map, dated August 1986. Every person has a story worth hearing. Every place has a lesson worth learning. I'm not collecting destinations. I'm collecting moments of being fully alive. He read it twice, then a third time. When was the last time he'd felt fully alive? Not content, not satisfied, not comfortable, but truly, vibrantly alive. Dad? Kyla's voice pulled him back. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever wish you'd done things differently? Like made different choices? Simon looked at his daughter, really looked at her. 16 years old, on the edge of adulthood, asking the questions that mattered. He could give her the safe answer, the parent answer. Or he could be honest. Yes, he said. I wanted to be an architect. Did you know that? Kyla shook her head. I was in my 3rd year of college when I met your mom. We were young, and then we were pregnant, and then... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I made choices that seemed responsible at the time. Got a steady job, gave up school, focused on providing. I thought that's what being an adult meant. Do you regret it? I don't regret you, Simon said immediately. Never you. But I regret not finding a way to do both, to be responsible and to chase the things that made me feel alive. Kyla nodded slowly. Your mom called last week. I didn't tell you. Simon felt something tighten in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. What did she say? She wanted to know if I was okay, if we were managing. Kyla's fingers traced the routes on Vivian's map. She said she's sorry, that she had to leave to find herself. Do you understand that? I think so. Reading about Vivian, how she had to leave everything to figure out who she was. It makes sense in a way, but it still hurt. Simon reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. It's okay for it to hurt and make sense at the same time. Vivian wrote about that, how the most important choices are usually the most painful ones. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Kyla pulled out another journal. We're up to 1988 now. Should we keep reading? They read about Vivian's continued travels, but the entries were different now. Shorter, more reflective. She wrote less about the places she visited and more about the people she met, the conversations that stayed with her, the moments that felt significant. And she wrote about being tired. So tired. January 1988, Colorado. I met someone. His name is... Kyla paused, squinting at the handwriting. I can't read it. She just put C. Anyway, she met someone and she's scared. Simon leaned over to look at the entry. Vivian had written several pages about this person, this C, who made her want to stop running, who made her imagine a different kind of life. He asked me to stay, Kyla read, to try building something here in this beautiful mountain town. He has a cabin, a workshop where he builds furniture. He makes beautiful things with his hands, things that will last long after he's gone. And I'm tempted. For the first time since I started this journey, I'm tempted to stop. The next entry was dated a week later. I left this morning before he woke up. I'm a coward. He deserves someone who can commit, who can plant roots, who can build a life that lasts. I'm a woman driving herself into the ground, literally. My body is failing and I can't drag him into that. Better to leave clean than to stay and watch him watch me deteriorate. This is what love looks like sometimes, choosing to leave. That's so sad, Kyla whispered. Simon felt it too, the weight of that choice. Vivian had found connection and walked away from it, believing she was doing the right thing. He thought about his own marriage, how he'd tried so hard to make it work, to hold on, even when both of them had been miserable. Maybe there wasn't a right answer. Maybe every choice came with loss. They found the letter an hour later, tucked between the pages like a bookmark. It was sealed in an envelope addressed simply to C, but never sent. Simon looked at Kyla. Should we read it? We've read everything else. He opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shakier here, written quickly, emotionally. My dear C, Simon read aloud. You asked me to stay, and I want you to know that part of me aches to say yes. These weeks with you have been the most peaceful of my entire journey. But if I stop moving, will I disappear? My grandmother warned me. Women in our family forget themselves when they love too much, when they try too hard to be what someone else needs. I've spent 2 years becoming myself, and I'm terrified of losing that. You deserve someone whole, someone healthy, someone who can give you forever. I can only give you borrowed time, and that's not fair to you. Please understand. Please forgive me. Please find someone who can love you the way you deserve. I'll carry you with me always. The letter was dated February 1988. Vivian would have been 27 years old. Sick, alone, choosing to keep moving rather than risk losing herself. Kyla wiped her eyes. Do you think she regretted it? I think she questioned it. Simon said, looking at the unsent letter. But I think she believed she was making the right choice. That night, after Kyla went to bed, Simon sat in the garage with the Porsche. He'd started working on it in the evenings, slowly cleaning and assessing what needed to be done. The car was in better shape than he'd thought. The engine was sound. The transmission needed work, but was salvageable. His friend Pete had stopped by that weekend, a mechanic who'd offered to help. Pete had taken one look at the car and whistled low. "You know what you've got here?" Pete had said. "This is a classic. Fix this up right. You could sell it for 40, maybe 50,000. Simon had felt something strange at those words, a possessiveness he hadn't expected. This wasn't just a car anymore. It was Vivian's story, her journey, her final possession. Selling it felt like a betrayal, but fixing it would be expensive. The parts alone would cost thousands, and he didn't have thousands to spare. Simon ran his hand along the dusty hood and made a promise to the ghost of Vivian Hart. He would restore this car. He would honor her memory. And somehow he would find Sophie and make sure she knew about the extraordinary woman who'd written her that letter. It was the least he could do for someone who'd taught him about courage 1 month into their journey with Vivian's journals. Simon had recruited Pete to help with the mechanical work. Every Saturday morning, Pete arrived with his toolbox and a thermos of coffee, and they worked on the Porsche together while Kyla sketched nearby. "You're different." "Man," Pete said one morning, elbow deep in the engine compartment. "More alive or something." Simon handed him a wrench. "You think? I know. Last year, you were going through the motions. Now you've got something in your eyes. Purpose, maybe." Pete paused his work to look at Simon directly. "It's good to see." Simon hadn't told Pete about the journals, hadn't shared Vivian's story with anyone outside his daughter. It felt private, sacred somehow. But Pete was right, something had changed. The journals had cracked something open inside him, let light into places that had been dark for years. The restoration was progressing slowly but steadily. They'd rebuilt the carburetor, replaced corroded fuel lines, cleaned decades of grime from the engine. The car was starting to look like something that might actually run again, but the costs were adding up. Parts for a vintage Porsche weren't cheap, and Simon's savings were disappearing faster than he'd anticipated. He'd taken on extra handyman work on weekends, fixing leaky faucets and painting rooms for neighbors who paid in cash. Every dollar went toward the car. Kyla had changed too. She'd submitted a piece to her school's spring art show, a sketch of the Porsche with Vivian's photograph taped to the hood, surrounded by quotes from the journals. Her art teacher had called it remarkably mature and emotionally resonant. Kyla had been nervous about showing something so personal, but she'd done it anyway. Vivian would be proud, Simon had told her, and Kyla had smiled in a way she hadn't smiled in years. One evening, in late March, they discovered another artifact in the leather case. Kyla had been carefully going through the documents, organizing them chronologically. When she found an envelope they'd somehow missed before, inside was a formal letter on heavy paper. Dated September 1991, the letterhead read, "Canyon Road Gallery, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Dear Ms. Hart," Simon read aloud, "thank you for submitting your portfolio for consideration. While we appreciate your technical skill and the evident passion in your work, we regret that we cannot offer you representation at this time." He paused, then continued reading the handwritten note at the bottom of the typed rejection. "Your technique is promising, but your work lacks the rawness of lived experience. Come back when you've truly suffered, when you've painted your demons instead of running from them. Maurice Kendrick, gallery director." "That's harsh," Kyla said. Simon flipped to the next item, Vivian's journal entry from the same date. Her handwriting was jagged, angry. "September 15th, 1991. Maurice Kendrick told me I haven't suffered enough, that my work is pretty but superficial, that I'm painting surfaces instead of depths. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just a trust fund girl playing at being an artist, running away from real life instead of engaging with it. Maybe this whole journey has been a cowardly escape, not a brave adventure." The entries that followed were dark. For weeks, Vivian barely wrote. She'd rented a room in Sedona and stopped traveling. The sketches in her journal during this period were rough, angry, unfinished. October 20th, 1991. I haven't painted in 3 weeks. I sit in front of blank canvases and feel nothing. Maybe Kendrick was right. Maybe I'm a fraud. Maybe I should go home, admit defeat, let father say, "I told you so." Kyla looked stricken. She almost gave up. "Keep reading," Simon said. "There's more." The breakthrough came in November. A single journal entry titled "Awakening" in underlined letters. November 3rd, 1991. I understand now. Kendrick was right, but not in the way he meant. I haven't been running from suffering, I've been running from truth. I've painted beautiful landscapes and interesting faces, but I haven't painted my own story. My grandmother's death, my family's disappointment, my illness, my fear. I've been documenting other people's authenticity while hiding my own. So here it is, I'm terrified. I'm sick. I'm alone. And I'm going to paint that. The pages that followed described a creative explosion. Vivian painted her grandmother's hands, wrinkled and wise. She painted her own body, showing the rash across her face that the lupus caused. She painted hospital waiting rooms and empty roads and the interior of the Porsche at night, lit only by dashboard lights. She painted her truth, Kyla said softly. Simon found photographs tucked into the journal, Polaroids of the paintings Vivian had described. They were raw, honest, painful, and they were beautiful in a way the earlier work hadn't been. December 1991. I sent new slides to Kendrick. I don't care if he accepts them or not. I painted them for me to exorcise my demons, to claim my own story. That's enough. There was no response from the gallery and the documents, no acceptance or second rejection. But Vivian's entries after that were different, more grounded, more confident. She'd found something essential by confronting her pain instead of running from it. Simon saw the parallel to his own life so clearly it hurt. He'd been living on the surface, avoiding depth, running from the hard questions. Why had his marriage failed? What did he really want from life? Who was he beneath the role of provider, of father, of steady, reliable Simon Foster? The next evening, Simon did something unexpected. He called his ex-wife. Janet answered on the third ring, surprised to hear from him outside their usual custody discussions. "Is Kyla okay?" she asked immediately. "She's fine. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to talk to you about something else." They met for coffee the next day, awkward and careful with each other. Janet looked good, healthier than she'd looked during their marriage, less worn down. "You look different too," she said, studying him across the table. "What's going on?" Simon told her about the Porsche, about finding Vivian's journals, about how reading them had made him see his own life differently. Janet listened without interrupting, something she'd never done when they were married. "I think I understand why you left," Simon said finally. "I was drowning too. We both were. I'm sorry I couldn't see it at the time." Janet's eyes filled with tears. "I left because I was suffocating. But I ran instead of staying to fight for us, for myself. I see now how much that hurt Kyla. She's working through it," Simon said, reading about Vivian, about someone who made hard choices and lived with the consequences. It's helping her understand that adults are just as lost and scared as teenagers. Sometimes they talked for 2 hours, the most honest conversation they'd had in 10 years of marriage and 3 years of divorce. They didn't reconcile, that ship had sailed, but they understood each other better. And that understanding felt like a gift. When Simon got home, Kyla was at the kitchen table with her sketchbook and Vivian's journals. "How was it?" she asked. "Good, honest." Simon sat down across from her. "We talked about things we should have talked about years ago." Kyla nodded. Vivian would approve. She wrote a lot about honesty, about how it's the only thing that makes connection real. That weekend, the restoration hit a major obstacle. The transmission needed more work than Pete had initially thought. Expensive work that would require specialized parts and expertise. "I hate to say it," Pete said, wiping grease from his hands, "but you're looking at maybe $3,000 just for the transmission. That's on top of what you've already spent. Might be time to cut your losses." Simon stood in the garage looking at the car. They'd made so much progress. The engine ran now, rough but alive. The interior was cleaned and conditioning. The body was prepped for paint. Giving up now felt impossible. "Dad," Kyla said that evening, "we have to finish it." For her, for us, she was right. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about honoring Vivian's memory, about completing something they'd started, about proving to themselves that they could see hard things through. Simon picked up extra work, a third job doing overnight inventory at a warehouse 2 nights a week. The hours were brutal. The pay was modest, but it would cover the transmission work. "You don't have to kill yourself," Kyla said, worried. "I'm not killing myself. I'm living with purpose. There's a difference." Simon smiled at her. "Vivian taught me that." Late that night, exhausted but unable to sleep, Simon read Vivian's entries about pushing through doubt, about commitment in the face of obstacles. March 1992. "My hands hurt so badly today, I could barely hold a brush. But I painted anyway, because the pain means I'm still here, still trying, still alive. That matters more than comfort." Simon closed the journal and made himself a promise. He would finish the restoration, no matter what it cost in time or money or exhaustion. Because Vivian had shown him that the things worth doing are usually the hardest things. And that courage isn't about not being tired. It's about continuing anyway. By mid-April, Simon was running on fumes. 3 jobs meant sleeping 5 hours a night, meant missing dinners with Kyla, meant falling asleep during conversations. The Porsche was progressing. The transmission was being rebuilt. The bodywork was nearly complete, but the cost was showing in the dark circles under Simon's eyes, in the way his hands trembled from exhaustion. "Dad, this is getting crazy," Kyla said one morning, when she found him asleep at the kitchen table, his face pressed against one of Vivian's journals. Simon jerked awake, disoriented. "What time is it?" 6:30. "You have to be at the factory in half an hour." She poured him coffee, concern written across her face. "You can't keep doing this." "I'm fine, you're not fine. You're exhausted." Kyla sat down across from him. "Vivian lived fully, Dad, but you're killing yourself." "That's not the same thing. That's not the lesson." Her words hit harder than they should have. Simon had been so focused on finishing the restoration, on honoring Vivian's memory, that he'd lost sight of what actually mattered, being present for his daughter, living with purpose rather than just working himself to death. At the factory that day, his exhaustion caught up with him. A simple inventory count he should have double-checked went through with errors, causing a production delay. His supervisor, a stern man named Gallagher, pulled him aside. "Foster, what's going on? You've been solid for 20 years, but lately you're distracted. This isn't like you. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. I'd hate to write you up, but I will if I have to." Simon nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. He couldn't afford to lose this job, not with bills piling up and the restoration costs mounting. But he couldn't give up on the Porsche either. That evening, he and Kyla returned to the journals. They were deep into 1992 now, and the entries were more sporadic, shorter. Vivian's illness was progressing, though she rarely mentioned it directly. Instead, she wrote about what she called good days and rest days, and Simon understood that the rest days were the ones where the lupus kept her in bed. April 1992. Good day. Drove to the coast, painted until sunset. My hands cooperated. This is what I live for. These moments when my body remembers what it's supposed to do. June 1992, rest day. 3 in a row now. I'm angry at this body, at this betrayal. But anger takes energy I don't have. Kyla found a postcard tucked into the July entries. It was a simple image of mountains at sunset, postmarked from Colorado. She turned it over and read aloud. "Dear Vivian, I understand now why you had to go. I hope you found what you were looking for. I found someone else, built a life, but I think of you when I hear certain songs. Be well, Vivian. Take care of yourself." See, the postcard had been sent to a friend's address, someone named Beverly in Seattle. Vivian had written her response on the next journal page, rather than sending it. July 10th, 1992, C wrote, "He's happy. He's found someone who can give him what I couldn't, permanence, stability, a future. I'm happy for him, truly, but I wonder sometimes about the life we didn't live. Would I have been whole, or would I have lost myself in trying to be what he needed? I'll never know. That's the price of the road I chose. Every path means leaving other paths behind. Simon read those words twice, feeling their weight. Every choice has a cost. Every path not taken remains a ghost of what might have been. Do you think she regretted leaving him? Kyla asked. I think she questioned it, Simon said. But questioning and regretting aren't the same thing. She made a choice she believed in, even knowing it would hurt. They talked late into the night, about choices and consequences, about paths taken and not taken. Simon told Kyla about the architecture degree he'd never finished, about the designs he sometimes still sketched on scrap paper during lunch breaks. Why don't you go back? Kyla asked. To school, I mean. I'm 47. That's too old to start over. Vivian was 33 when she died, and she never stopped starting over. Kyla looked at him with those serious eyes. Age is just, I don't know, an excuse maybe? Simon thought about that after she went to bed. Was age an excuse? Or was it a practical reality? He had bills, responsibilities, a daughter to raise. Going back to school wasn't realistic, but then neither was spending $3,000 restoring a dead woman's car, because her story had touched something in him he'd thought was long dead. The next Saturday, Pete arrived to work on the Porsche. They were down to the final mechanical issues, fine-tuning the engine, adjusting the transmission. Almost there, Pete said, standing back to admire their work. Another month, maybe 2, and you'll have something special. But that afternoon, they discovered another problem. The brake system needed to be completely replaced. The lines were corroded. The calipers were seized. Another $1,500 minimum. Simon sat down on the garage floor, suddenly overwhelmed. He'd already spent more than he'd planned, worked more hours than he should, pushed himself past reasonable limits. And now this. I can't do it, he said quietly. I can't keep spending money we don't have. Pete sat down beside him. You could sell it as is. Get most of your money back. Cut your losses. Is that what you do? Pete was quiet for a moment. No, but I'm not the one working 3 jobs and raising a teenager alone. Kyla appeared in the garage doorway. She'd been listening. Dad, you told me that Vivian kept going even when she was sick, even when it would have been easier to stop. You said that was courage. This is different. How? You started something that matters. Are you going to quit because it got harder than you expected? Simon looked at his daughter, 16 years old and wiser than he'd given her credit for. She was right. Quitting now would be admitting that money and exhaustion mattered more than commitment, more than honoring a promise he'd made to himself and to Vivian's memory. Okay, he said finally. We finish it. That night Simon made a decision. He'd quit the warehouse job. The overnight shifts were destroying him. He'd finish the restoration more slowly, save up for each repair instead of rushing. It would take longer, but he'd still be present for Kyla, still be able to function at his main job. Quality over speed. Presence over perfection. The journals from late 1992 and early 1993 showed Vivian making similar calculations. She wrote about slowing down, about choosing carefully which trips to take, which paintings to attempt. Her body was forcing her to be more intentional, more present in each moment. January 1993, I'm planning what I'm calling my farewell tour. One last drive across the country, visiting the places that shaped me, the people who matter. I don't know how much time I have left. The doctors won't give me numbers, just worried looks, but I know it's limited. So I'll make it count. Every mile, every conversation, every sunrise. I'll make it all count. Reading those words, Simon felt tears on his face. Vivian had known she was dying and had chosen to spend her remaining time living, not waiting. She'd faced her mortality with open eyes and kept driving anyway. She's so brave, Kyla whispered. She's human, Simon said. Scared and brave at the same time. That's what makes her story matter. She wasn't fearless. She was just willing to act despite the fear. They read about Vivian's farewell tour, a careful route through the places that had meant the most to her. New Orleans for the music, Taos for the light, the Grand Canyon for perspective. Colorado, where she'd fallen in love and chosen to leave, and then, in the spring of 1993, a cryptic entry: "I need to see her one more time, even if she doesn't know me, even if it breaks my heart. I need to know she's okay." "Who's her?" Kyla asked. "She keeps writing about someone, but she never says who." Simon had noticed it too, references throughout the later journals to a her that Vivian missed, worried about, hoped was happy. At first he'd assumed it was her sister, but the emotional weight seemed different, deeper. "I don't know," Simon said, "but I think we're about to find out." They were approaching the end of the journals now, the final months of Vivian's life. Simon felt a strange reluctance to finish reading, as if closing the last journal would mean losing her completely, ending the connection that had transformed his life over these past months. But the story had to be read. The truth had to be known, and somewhere in these final pages was the answer to who Sophie was, and why Vivian had written her that letter of love and apology. 2 months had passed since they'd first opened the leather case. The Porsche was nearly complete, paint restored to its original guards, red, interior reupholstered, engine purring with precision. It looked beautiful, almost new, as if the decades had fallen away. Simon had quit the warehouse job as planned, and the change was immediate. He slept better, smiled more, actually had conversations with Kyla instead of falling asleep mid-sentence. They still worked on the car together every weekend, but at a sustainable pace. With Pete's help and careful budgeting, Kyla's art had blossomed. Her piece had been featured prominently at the school show, and her art teacher had suggested she consider applying to summer programs. She was sketching constantly now, developing her own style, bold lines and emotional depth that reminded Simon of Vivian's later work. One evening in late May, they settled down with the journals from 1993. These were the final entries, the ones Simon had been both eager and reluctant to reach. Vivian's handwriting was shakier now, less controlled, but her voice remained strong. March 1993. "The doctors want me to stop traveling. They use words like decline and management and quality of life. But my quality of life is the road. It's sunrise in new places and conversations with strangers, and the feeling of the steering wheel under my hands. If I stop now, I'll just be waiting to die. I'd rather die while living." Kyla's voice was thick with emotion as she read. She knew. She knew it was almost over. They read about Vivian's final journey, a deliberate retracing of her original route from 1985. But this time, instead of running towards something, she was saying goodbye. She visited old friends, gave away paintings, wrote letters of thanks to people who'd shown her kindness years before. April 1993, New Orleans. Found the jazz musician I met in '85. He's older, we both are. He played for me in his living room, just the two of us, and his saxophone and the evening light through the windows. He knew I was sick. He played a requiem, beautiful and sad, and I cried. He said, "You lived more in 8 years than most people live in 80. I hope that's true. Simon thought about his own life, 47 years of playing it safe, of choosing security over passion, of existing rather than living. Vivian had packed more life into 33 years than he'd managed in nearly 50, but that was changing. Reading her story had changed him. May 1993, Colorado. I drove past the cabin where C lived. Someone else lives there now. I saw children's toys in the yard. I'm glad. I hope he's happy. I hope his life is full. They made the right choice, even if it was the hard one. Then they found it, the entry that explained everything. It was dated May 15th, 1993, written from a motel in Portland, Oregon. I'm in Portland to see her, Sophie, my daughter. Tomorrow, I'll drive to the house where her parents live, where she's growing up safe and loved and stable. I won't introduce myself. I gave up that right 6 years ago when I signed the adoption papers, but I need to see her. I need to know she's okay." The words hit Simon like a physical blow. Daughter. Sophie was Vivian's daughter. "Oh my God," Kyla whispered. She had a baby. They tore through the journals, backtracking, searching for mentions they'd missed. And there they were, coded references, oblique entries that made sense now in hindsight. October 1987. I'm pregnant. I've known for 3 weeks and haven't written it down because writing it makes it real. I'm 26, sick, alone, and pregnant. C doesn't know. I left before I was certain. What do I do? How can I be a mother when I'm barely holding myself together? November 1987. I've decided. I'll carry her to term. The doctors say pregnancy won't hurt me or the baby, though it might accelerate my decline. But I can't raise her. I can't give her the stability she deserves. I'll find a good family, people who can give her everything I can't. It's the most loving thing I can do, even if it destroys me. December 15th, 1987, Portland. She was born this morning. Sophie Hart, 7 pounds 3 ounces, perfect. I held her for 3 days. 3 days of memorizing her face, her tiny fingers, the way she wrinkled her nose when she slept. Tomorrow the Parkers come to take her home. They're good people, a teacher and a carpenter, stable and kind. They'll love her. They'll give her roots. And I'll give her up. Simon couldn't see the page through his tears. Vivian hadn't been just a free spirit chasing adventure. She'd been a mother who'd made the most painful choice imaginable, giving up her child to provide a better life. December 18th, 1987. I left Portland this morning. I didn't look back. If I'd looked back, I couldn't have left. Sophie is with the Parkers now. They're her parents. I'm just the woman who gave birth to her and loved her enough to let her go. Every entry after that took on new meaning. The paintings Vivian made, the miles she drove, the experiences she collected, all of it was colored by grief, by loss, by the choice she'd made. She was running, Kyla said, understanding dawning. Not toward freedom, but away from the pain of giving Sophie up. She was doing both, Simon said. Living fully and running from heartbreak at the same time. They found more entries scattered through the years. Brief mentions of wondering about Sophie, hoping she was happy, imagining what she looked like, what kind of person she was becoming. Sophie's birthday today. She's 3. I wonder if she likes cake, if she's afraid of the dark, if she has my grandmother's smile. Sophie's first day of school. Is she nervous, excited? Does she know how loved she is? And then, the entry from May 1993, the one that explained Vivian's final journey, May 16th, 1993. I saw her. I parked down the street and watched her play in the yard. She's 6 now, tall for her age with dark hair like mine. She was laughing, chasing a dog, completely carefree. Her mother, her real mother, the one who raises her, called her inside for lunch. She ran to her with such trust, such love. I made the right choice. She's happy. She's safe. She doesn't need me. This is goodbye. Simon closed the journal and sat in silence. Vivian had lived her whole adult life carrying this grief, this love for a daughter she'd chosen to give up. Every mile she drove, every painting she made, every brave choice she made, all of it was shadowed by Sophie's absence. The letter, Kyla said suddenly. The one we found at the beginning, addressed to Sophie. We need to read it again. Simon found the letter in the leather case and read it with new understanding. Every word carried the weight of 6 years of absence, of love expressed through distance, of a mother who'd sacrificed everything for her daughter's well-being. We have to find her, Kyla said. Sophie needs to know about Vivian. She needs to know her mother loved her. She might not want to know. She might be angry that Vivian gave her up. Or she might spend her whole life wondering about her birth mother, imagining the worst. Kyla looked at him with determination. We have the Porsche, we have the journals, we have proof of who Vivian was. We can give Sophie her mother's story. Simon thought about it. Finding Sophie wouldn't be easy. The adoption was 30 years ago. Records were likely sealed. The Parkers might have moved. But Kyla was right. They had an obligation to try. Okay, he said. We'll find her. The final journal entries from late 1993 and early 1994 were brief, increasingly difficult to read as Vivian's handwriting deteriorated. But her spirit remained strong. January 1994, I'm tired. So tired, but I finished one last painting, the best thing I've ever done. I call it The Road Not Taken. It shows a fork in the road, 2 figures walking away from each other. One toward a sunrise, one toward a house with a child's swing. It's about choosing, and about how every choice means leaving something beautiful behind. April 1994. This is probably my last entry. The doctors say weeks, maybe days. I've made arrangements. The Porsche goes to Sophie when she turns 25, along with everything in this case. My lawyer has instructions. I hope she understands. I hope she forgives me. I hope she knows that every hard mile I drove thinking of her, wishing her a life full of both adventure and stability, of both wings and roots. I love you, Sophie. I will always love you. The journal ended there. The obituary they'd found earlier was dated April 18, 1994. 3 days after that final entry, Kyla was crying openly now. She died thinking about Sophie. Simon pulled his daughter into a hug, both of them grieving for a woman they'd never met but had come to love through her words. "We'll find her," Simon promised. "We'll make sure Sophie knows." That night, Simon couldn't sleep. He went to the garage and sat in the restored Porsche, running his hands over the steering wheel that Vivian had gripped, the seats where she'd sat, the car that had carried her through joy and grief and everything in between. The car wasn't his. It had never been his. It was Sophie's inheritance, her mother's final gift, a time capsule of love and courage and impossible choices. He would find Sophie Parker. He would tell her about Vivian, and he would give her back the mother she'd never known. Finding Sophie proved more difficult than Simon had imagined. Adoption records from 1987 were sealed, protected by privacy laws. The Parkers, if that was even their real name, could have moved anywhere in the 30 years since Vivian had given up her daughter. Simon started with what he knew. Vivian had mentioned Portland, Oregon. She'd written about watching Sophie play in a yard in May 1993, which meant the family was still there 6 years after the adoption. But that was 25 years ago now. He called the courthouse, explained his situation to a clerk who sounded sympathetic but firm. "Adoption records are confidential, even with good intentions. I can't help you." He tried searching online, social media, public records, anything. But without knowing Sophie's adopted surname or current location, he found nothing. Pete suggested hiring a private investigator, but Simon couldn't afford it. He'd spent every spare dollar on the Porsche restoration. Then Kyla remembered something. "Dad, Vivian mentioned a lawyer in her will, remember? She said she'd made arrangements for Sophie to receive the car when she turned 25. They searched through the documents again and found it, a copy of Vivian's will. Witnessed and notarized in Portland in March 1994, just weeks before she died. The lawyer's name was Maxwell Hughes, with an address on Southwest Broadway. Simon called the number listed, expecting it to be disconnected after 30 years. Instead, a receptionist answered. "Hughes and Associates. I'm looking for Maxwell Hughes. This is about a client from 1994, Vivian Hart." There was a pause. "Mr. Hughes is retired, but let me see if he's willing to speak with you." 10 minutes later, Simon's phone rang. The voice on the other end was elderly but sharp. "This is Max Hughes. You mentioned Vivian Hart. I remember her well. How can I help you?" Simon explained everything, finding the Porsche, the journals, the discovery of Sophie's existence. "I'm trying to find her daughter. Vivian wanted Sophie to have the car and her story." Hughes was quiet for a long moment. "Vivian created a trust. Sophie was supposed to be contacted when she turned 25. That would have been 2012. But she never responded. Either she didn't want to know about Vivian or what? Or she never received the notification. People move, change names. I sent letters to the Parker family's last known address, but they were returned as undeliverable." Simon's heart sank. "So you don't know where she is?" "I didn't say that." Hughes paused. "Give me your email address. I'll send you what I have. But Mr. Foster, consider carefully before you proceed. You might be opening old wounds. Sophie might not want this, I understand. But she deserves to know the truth about her mother." The email arrived an hour later. Hughes had sent the last known address for the Parker family from 1998, along with Sophie's adopted name, Sophie Winters. The Parkers had legally changed their surname when Sophie was young. Armed with this information, Simon searched again. And this time, he found something. A high school art teacher named Sophie Winters in Bellingham, Washington. The age was right. She'd be 37 now. And the fact that she taught art felt like too much of a coincidence. That has to be her, Kyla said, looking at the professional bio on the school's website. There was a photo, a woman with dark hair and kind eyes who looked hauntingly familiar. She has Vivian's face, Simon whispered, but how to approach her? He couldn't just show up at her school. He couldn't call out of nowhere and say, "I have information about your birth mother." After much discussion, Simon and Kyla decided to write a letter. They spent hours crafting it, trying to strike the right balance between informative and gentle. "Dear Miss Winters, my name is Simon Foster. I recently purchased a 1985 Porsche 911 and discovered documents in the trunk that I believe belong to your birth mother, Vivian Hart. If you're interested in learning more about her, please contact me." They included Simon's phone number and email, then mailed the letter to the school. The waiting was excruciating. Days passed with no response. Then a week. Simon began to think Sophie had thrown the letter away, decided she didn't want to know. Then, on a Tuesday evening, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Foster, this is Sophie Winters. I got your letter." Simon's hands shook as he gripped the phone. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." Her voice was careful, controlled. "I've always known I was adopted. My adoptive parents, were wonderful about it. But I never searched for my birth mother. I was afraid of what I'd find. Or that she wouldn't want to be found." "She did want to be found," Simon said gently. "She left everything for you. The car, her journals, letters. She wanted you to know her story." There was a long silence. "Then can we meet? I need to see this for myself." They arranged to meet in 3 days at a cafe in Bellingham. Simon and Kyla would drive up, bringing the leather case and selected items from Vivian's collection. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. Simon cleaned and polished the Porsche until it gleamed. Kyla organized the journals chronologically, marked important passages with sticky notes. They both felt the weight of what they were about to do, reuniting a daughter with her mother's memory, bridging a gap of 37 years. The morning they left, Simon sat in the driver's seat of the Porsche and took a deep breath. This car had carried Vivian through all her adventures, through joy and heartbreak and everything between. Now it would carry him and Kyla to complete Vivian's final wish. "Ready?" Kyla asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "Ready?" The drive to Bellingham took 2 hours. The Porsche ran beautifully, purring along the highway as if it had been waiting for this journey. Simon thought about Vivian driving these same roads, thought about Sophie growing up, not knowing her mother's story. They arrived at the cafe early and waited outside. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman approached, dark hair pulled back, wearing a simple dress, carrying herself with a grace that was unmistakably familiar. Sophie Winters stopped a few feet away. Her eyes locked on the Porsche. "That's the car," she said softly. "I've seen pictures. My parents, the Parkers, they kept one photograph of her. She was standing next to this car." Simon nodded, unable to speak. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Tell me about her. Tell me about my mother." They sat at a corner table in the cafe, the leather case between them like a bridge across time. Sophie's hands trembled as she reached for it, then pulled back. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said. "Take your time," Simon said gently. "We have all afternoon." Sophie looked at Kyla. "How old are you?" 16. "I have a daughter who's 14. And a son who's 10. Sophie smiled sadly. "I became a mother without ever knowing mine. I used to wonder, did she think about me? Did she regret giving me up?" "She thought about you every day," Kyla said. "And she never regretted you. Only the circumstances that made her give you up." Simon opened the case carefully and pulled out the first photograph. Young Vivian beside the Porsche in 1985. Radiant and alive, Sophie took it with shaking hands. She stared at the image for a long time, tears streaming down her face. She was so young, so beautiful. "That was the day she bought the car," Simon said. "The beginning of her journey." He told her Vivian's story, the grandmother's inheritance, the Declaration of Freedom, the cross-country travels. He showed her the hand-drawn map, the journals filled with adventures and insights. He explained about the lupus diagnosis, about Vivian's choice to keep living fully despite the illness. And then he told her about Colorado, about the man Vivian had loved and left, about discovering she was pregnant and making the impossible decision. "She carried you for 9 months," Simon said quietly. "She held you for 3 days, and then she gave you to the Parkers because she believed they could give you what she couldn't: stability, health, a future." Sophie was crying openly now. "I had a good childhood. My parents loved me so much. I never felt like I was missing anything." "That's what Vivian hoped for," Kyla said. "She wrote about that, hoping you'd be happy, hoping you'd feel loved." Simon showed Sophie the journal entries, the ones from the pregnancy, from the birth, from the heartbreaking days after giving her up. Sophie read them through tears, her hands pressed against her mother's handwriting, as if she could feel Vivian through the ink. "May 1993, Simon said. "Vivian came back to Portland. She found your house and watched you play in the yard. You were 6 years old. She wrote that seeing you happy and loved was the greatest gift she could have received. It told her she'd made the right choice. She saw me." Sophie's voice was barely a whisper, from a distance. "She didn't want to disrupt your life, but she needed to know you were okay." They sat for hours in that cafe, Simon and Kyla telling Sophie everything they'd learned about Vivian. They showed her paintings photographed in the journals, read her favorite passages, explained how Vivian's art had evolved from pretty surfaces to raw emotional truth. "She sounds extraordinary," Sophie said. "Brave and flawed and real. She was human," Simon said. "That's what makes her story so powerful. She wasn't fearless. She was terrified most of the time. But she acted anyway." As the afternoon wore into evening, Sophie began to ask questions. What had Vivian liked to eat? What music did she listen to? Did she have friends? Was she ever truly happy? Simon and Kyla answered what they could, pulling details from the journals. Yes, she loved jazz and blues. Yes, she made friends easily, but kept moving before connections grew too deep. Yes, she was happy, not constantly, but in moments, in the spaces between doubt and pain. "There's something else," Simon said finally. He pulled out the sealed letter Vivian had written to Sophie. She wrote this near the end. "It's addressed to you." Sophie took the envelope with reverent hands. She held it for a long moment before opening it. "Dear Sophie," she read aloud, her voice breaking. "My beautiful girl, I held you for 3 days before I let you go. It was the hardest and most loving thing I've ever done. I was 26, broken, sick, and lost. I couldn't give you roots because I was still searching for my own. Your parents will love you in ways I couldn't. They'll give you the steady ground I never had. I hope you paint. I hope you travel. I hope you have both the stability I gave you and the wildness I kept for myself. You were not a mistake. You were the best thing I ever created. And letting you go was how I loved you most. Forgive me or don't, but know you were loved, always. Your mother, Vivian." The cafe had emptied around them. The waitress discreetly left them alone, refilling coffee without interrupting. Sophie read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing fresh tears. "She loved me," Sophie said finally. "All this time I wondered if I was a mistake, if she'd forgotten about me. But she loved me, more than anything," Kyla said. Sophie looked at the Porsche through the cafe window. "The lawyer tried to contact me years ago when I turned 25, but the letters went to my parents' old address. We'd moved by then. I never knew." "You know now," Simon said. Sophie stood abruptly. Can I sit in the car?" They walked outside together. Simon opened the driver's door, and Sophie slid behind the wheel. She gripped it where Vivian's hands had gripped it, sat where Vivian had sat for thousands of miles. "I feel her," Sophie whispered. "Is that crazy?" "No," Simon said. "I've felt her too." Sophie looked up at him through the open door. "This car, it's yours. You restored it." "No," Simon said firmly. "It was always yours. Vivian's will specified it. The car belongs to you. I can't take it. You put so much into it. We restored it for you. For her, this is your inheritance, Sophie. Take it." Sophie got out of the car and hugged Simon, then Kyla. "Thank you. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for bringing her back to me. Will you come to my house?" Sophie asked. "Meet my family?" They should know about Vivian, too. Simon and Kyla followed Sophie's car through Bellingham to a modest house with a swing set in the yard. Her husband greeted them warmly, confused but welcoming. Her children, a 14-year-old girl and 10-year-old boy, stared at the red Porsche with wide eyes. They spent the evening sharing Vivian's story with Sophie's family, passing around photographs and journals, reading selected passages aloud. Sophie's daughter, hearing about her grandmother's adventures, declared she wanted to be an artist too. As night fell, Simon knew it was time to leave. But something had shifted. They weren't just returning a car and some documents. They'd given Sophie something precious: her history, her mother's love, the truth about where she came from. "Keep in touch?" Sophie asked at the door. "Absolutely," Simon promised. On the drive home, Kyla was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "We did it, Dad. We kept our promise to Vivian." Simon smiled, exhausted and fulfilled in a way he'd never felt before. "We did." 3 days after meeting Sophie, Simon received a text message. "Can you come back this weekend? I want to show you something." He and Kyla drove back to Bellingham on Saturday morning. Sophie met them at the door, her eyes bright with an emotion Simon couldn't quite name. "Come in," she said. "I've been going through everything, the journals, the letters, every photograph. I haven't slept much. I can't stop reading her words." Inside, the living room had been transformed. Vivian's journals were spread across the coffee table, organized chronologically. Photographs lined the mantel. The hand-drawn map hung on the wall, carefully framed. "My husband thinks I've gone a little crazy," Sophie said with a smile. "But I needed to see it all, to understand her journey completely." She led them to her art studio, a converted garage filled with canvases, paints, and afternoon light. On the largest easel stood a painting, still wet. It was Vivian, not copied from a photograph, but imagined. Vivian at 33, standing beside the Porsche, but this time Sophie stood beside her. Mother and daughter together, separated by time but united in the painted moment. "It's beautiful," Kyla whispered. "I've been painting since I was a child," Sophie said. "My parents, the Parkers, they encouraged it. I never knew where it came from, this need to create. Now I understand. It's in my blood." She turned to face Simon and Kyla. "I need to do something, and I need your help." "Anything," Simon said. Vivian made a farewell tour, visiting the places that mattered to her, saying goodbye. "I want to do the opposite. I want to trace her journey, see the places she saw, complete the circle." Sophie's voice grew stronger with conviction. "And I want to drive the Porsche, the way she did." Simon felt something settle in his chest, rightness, completion. "When do you want to go?" "This summer. A month-long road trip following her map. My family will come, my husband and kids. We'll turn it into an adventure, a way of knowing her." Kyla leaned forward. "Can we come? For part of it at least?" Sophie smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Without you two, I never would have known her. You're part of this story now." They spent the afternoon planning. Sophie had already requested time off from her teaching job. Her husband, a carpenter named Ben, was excited about the journey. Their children were thrilled at the prospect of a cross-country adventure. "We'll start in Portland," Sophie said, tracing the route on Vivian's map, "where she gave me up. Then follow her path, Colorado, New Mexico, Louisiana, all the places she wrote about. It'll be healing," Ben said quietly. He'd been listening from the kitchen doorway. "For all of us. The kids need to understand where they come from, who their grandmother was." As the sun set, Sophie walked Simon and Kyla out to the Porsche. She'd already begun making it her own. A dream catcher hung from the rearview mirror, a photo of her family tucked into the sun visor. "I've been thinking about Vivian's choices," Sophie said. "About how she gave me up because she thought it was best for me. For years, whenever I thought about my birth mother, I imagined someone who didn't want me, someone who abandoned me." She paused, emotion thick in her voice. "But now I understand. She wanted me so much that she gave me the life she couldn't provide. That's not abandonment. That's the deepest love imaginable." Simon thought about his own choices, his own fears. "She taught me something too. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." that living fully matters more than living safely. What are you going to do with that lesson? Sophie asked. Simon glanced at Kyla, then back at Sophie. I'm going back to school. Architecture. I gave it up 25 years ago because it seemed impractical. But Vivian showed me that deferring dreams is the same as killing them slowly. Sophie hugged him. She'd be proud of you, of what you did for me, of how you honored her memory. As they prepared to leave, Sophie's daughter ran out of the house. Wait, Grandma Vivian, can I call her that? She painted, right? She did, Kyla said. Then I'm going to paint too. Mom's teaching me. We're going to have a show together next year. 3 generations of artists. Driving home, Simon felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He'd bought a broken car and found a broken woman's story. In fixing one, he'd helped heal the other. And in the process, he'd fixed something in himself, Dad. Kyla said as they crossed back into their town, Yeah? Thank you for buying that car, for not giving up on it, for teaching me what it means to follow through on something that matters. Simon reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. Thank you for taking the journey with me. The Porsche was Sophie's now, as it should be. But the lessons Vivian had taught them, about courage, about living authentically, about love expressed through impossible choices, those belonged to all of them. And those lessons, Simon knew, would last far longer than any car. 2 months later, in mid-July, Sophie called with news. We're starting the trip next week. Can you and Kyla meet us in Colorado? I want to find the cabin where Vivian met my father. Where it all began, Simon took a week off from the factory, his first vacation in 5 years. He and Kyla flew to Denver, rented a car, and drove into the mountains to meet Sophie's family. They found them at a small bed and breakfast in a town Vivian had written about extensively. The Porsche sat in the gravel parking lot, dusty from mountain roads, looking perfectly at home against the backdrop of pine trees and peaks. Sophie emerged from the inn, followed by her family. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if a weight she'd carried her whole life had finally lifted. We've been on the road for 5 days, she said, hugging them both. Following Vivian's route exactly, stopping where she stopped, seeing what she saw. It's been incredible. Her daughter, Marina, was sketching in a journal. Her son, Tyler, was examining the Porsche's engine with his father. They'd become a family on a mission, united by a woman none of them had known, but all of them felt connected to. Tomorrow we're going to find the cabin, Sophie said. I've been putting it off, saving it. I'm nervous. Do you want us there? Simon asked. I need you there. You knew her through her words. You can help me understand. The next morning, they caravanned up a winding mountain road, following directions Sophie had pieced together from Vivian's journals and local property records. The cabin was still there, weathered but standing, occupied by a family who graciously allowed them to look around. Sophie stood in the driveway, staring at the structure where her parents had met, where she'd been conceived, where Vivian had made the choice to leave. She stood right here, Sophie said, her voice breaking. She loved him. She was pregnant with me, and she walked away because she thought it was the right thing to do. Ben put his arm around his wife. Their children stood close, sensing the significance of the moment. Was it the right thing? Sophie asked no one in particular. Would I have been better off knowing them both? Or was she right, that I needed the stability she couldn't give? Simon thought about his own life, his own choices. I don't think there's a right answer. Just choices and consequences. You had a good childhood, right? You were loved. Completely. Then she made the choice that worked, even if it destroyed her to make it. Simon looked at the cabin, imagining Vivian here decades ago, young and scared and trying to do the right thing. She carried that pain so you wouldn't have to. Sophie walked to the Porsche and opened the trunk, the same trunk where Simon had found the leather case. She pulled out one of Vivian's journals and read aloud from the entry dated February 1988. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. C is still asleep. I've written him a letter I'll never send. I love him. I love the life we could have had. But I can't trap him with my illness, my uncertainty, my child. He deserves someone whole. And she, Sophie's voice caught, and she deserves a life I can't give her. This is love. Walking away is love. They stood in silence, the mountain air cool and pine-scented, the weight of Vivian's sacrifice settling over them. Marina spoke up, her young voice clear in the quiet. Great-Grandma Vivian was brave. She did the hard thing because she loved you. Sophie knelt down and hugged her daughter. She was. And I'm grateful. For her choice, for her sacrifice, for the life she gave me, even though it meant giving me up. They took photographs. Sophie and her family beside the cabin, the Porsche in the foreground, mountains rising behind them. Images to document this moment of understanding, of completion, of forgiveness. That evening, they gathered at the bed and breakfast for dinner. Sophie had brought some of Vivian's paintings, photographs of them at least, and they passed them around, studying the evolution of her art from pretty landscapes to raw emotional truth. "I want to have an exhibition," Sophie announced. Vivian's work and mine side by side. Mother and daughter, separated by time, but connected through art. I've already talked to a gallery in Seattle. They're interested. Simon felt tears in his eyes. This was what Vivian had wanted, not to be forgotten, not to disappear, but to live on through her daughter. Through her work, through the connections she'd forged even in absence. She'd love that, Kyla said. "I know," Sophie smiled. "I can feel her approval somehow." "Is that strange?" "No," Simon said. "I felt her presence through this whole journey. In the car, in the journals, in the choices we've all made because of her story." Sophie raised her glass. "To Vivian Hart, a woman who loved fiercely, lived boldly, and made impossible choices with grace. A mother I never knew but will never forget." They all raised their glasses. Sophie's family, Simon, Kyla, united by a woman whose courage had touched them all across the barrier of death. "To Vivian," they echoed. And in that moment, Simon felt it, the completion of something that had started 4 months ago in his driveway with a rusty car and a leather case. He'd helped heal a family, honor a woman's memory, and in the process, he'd healed himself. The journey wasn't over. Sophie would continue following Vivian's route. Simon would start school in the fall. Kyla would keep creating art. But the hardest part, the finding, the understanding, the forgiveness, was complete. Vivian's story would live on. And that, Simon knew, was the greatest gift they could have given her. 3 months had passed since the journey to Colorado. Autumn had arrived, painting the trees in Simon's neighborhood with the same vibrant colors Vivian had once captured in her paintings. Simon stood in his driveway, the empty space where the Porsche had sat for months, now filled with nothing but fallen leaves. But the emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like completion. His life had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined when he'd first bought that rusted car. He'd enrolled in evening classes at the community college, working toward finishing his architecture degree. The coursework was challenging after 25 years away, but he approached it with a determination he'd never possessed as a young man. Vivian had taught him that it's never too late to reclaim deferred dreams. The factory job continued, but Simon saw it differently now. Not as a trap, but as a foundation. It paid the bills and gave him the stability to pursue what mattered. He'd learned from Vivian's story that you didn't have to choose between responsibility and passion. You could honor both. Kyla had been accepted into a prestigious summer art program for the following year with a full scholarship. Her portfolio, filled with sketches documenting their journey with Vivian's story, had impressed the selection committee. She still sketched constantly, but now she also talked about her future with excitement rather than uncertainty. Their relationship had transformed. They really talked, about things that mattered. The distance that had existed for 3 years had been bridged by a dead woman's journals and a shared mission to honor her memory. Simon's phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Gallery opening next month. You're coming, right?" He smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Sophie had completed Vivian's route, driving the Porsche to all the places her mother had visited. She documented the journey in paintings and photographs, creating a body of work that honored Vivian while establishing her own artistic voice. The exhibition, titled Roots and Wings, A Daughter's Journey Home, would feature Vivian's paintings alongside Sophie's new work. Pete stopped by that afternoon, bringing coffee and curiosity. "How's school going?" "Exhausting, exhilarating," Simon grinned. "I had forgotten how much I loved designing things, creating spaces that matter." "You look 10 years younger," Pete observed. "That car, finding those journals, it changed you." "It did. Vivian changed me. She showed me what courage actually looks like, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it." Pete nodded toward the empty driveway. "Miss the car?" "Sometimes. But it's where it belongs, with Sophie. I see pictures, she posts them on social media. The Porsche at the Grand Canyon, in New Orleans, at the Oregon coast. It's still traveling, still carrying stories." That evening, Simon sat with Kyla at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd first opened the leather case and discovered Vivian's world. They were working on homework together, a comfortable routine they'd established. "Mum called today," Kyla said, not looking up from her math problems. Simon's hand paused over his textbook. "How is she?" "Good. She asked about the Porsche, about Sophie. She said she's proud of us, of what we did." Kyla looked up. "She wants to visit next month. Is that okay?" "Of course." "She's your mother." She said something else too. She said reading about Vivian made her think about her own choices, about running away instead of fighting for what mattered. Kyla's voice was quiet. "I think she regrets leaving." Simon thought about that. "Regret is complicated. Maybe she needed to leave to understand what she'd lost. People are messy and imperfect. Vivian taught me that too. You can make painful choices and still be worthy of love and understanding." The doorbell rang. Simon opened it to find a package, a large flat envelope with a Seattle postmark. Inside was an invitation to Sophie's gallery opening, along with a photograph. It showed the restored Porsche in Sophie's driveway, surrounded by her family. But beside it was another image, the original photograph of young Vivian with the car in 1985. The two images were mounted side by side, showing the car then and now, the mother then and the daughter now. On the back, Sophie had written, "Thank you for bringing my mother home to me. Thank you for showing me that love sometimes looks like letting go, and that courage sometimes looks like holding on. The exhibition is dedicated to you and Kyla, the guardians of stories, the keepers of memories, the people who finish what others start. With gratitude and love, Sophie." Simon felt tears on his face. This was why it had all mattered. The late nights reading journals, the exhaustion of 3 jobs, the restoration work, the search for Sophie. Not for recognition or reward, but for this. A daughter knowing her mother, a story preserved, a legacy honored. "We did good, didn't we?" Kyla said, reading over his shoulder. "We did." That night Simon couldn't sleep. He went to the garage where the Porsche had sat for months. The oil stains on the concrete were still visible, ghost marks of the car's presence. He stood there, remembering the first day he'd opened that trunk, the moment everything had changed. Sometimes the things we think will save us end up teaching us how to truly live. He'd bought a car hoping to connect with his daughter. He'd found a woman's life story, and in the process he'd discovered something essential about courage, about love, about the choices that define us. Vivian Hart had lived boldly and died young, but her story hadn't ended with her death. It had multiplied, touched lives, created connections across decades. Through Sophie, through the art they would both create, through the lessons they'd all learned. Vivian would live on. Simon looked up at the stars through the garage window and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Vivian, for the journey, for the lessons, for showing me what it means to live." And somewhere, in the space between memory and spirit, he felt her answer, not in words, but in the deep knowing that his life had been changed, that he'd honored her story, that the broken car in a salvage yard had carried them all toward healing. The Porsche was gone, but its gift remained, a reminder that courage means acting despite fear, that love sometimes requires sacrifice, and that our stories, the ones we live and the ones we leave behind, matter more than we know. Simon Foster, at 48, was finally fully alive. And that was everything.